Hi, everybody, and welcome to yet another Social Blueprint interview, where we are trying to bring you meetings with people in a community, some of that you may know, some that you may not know, but all have a story to tell. But before we get to today's interview with Bruce Rosengarten, I just want to say, here at the Social Blueprint, we're so much more than just videos. We are a true resource for the community. We have what I believe is the most comprehensive events calendar in Melbourne. We have over 500 organizations signed up. So if you need financial need, literacy need, any type of need at all, there surely is something there. So go to the website, sign up, it's completely free. I promise you'll find something that suits you. Now, onwards to today's interview. Structure, getting better, scaling, and just getting more efficient in your overall life. If you have those questions like I do personally, well, today we have Bruce Rosengarten, because Bruce is going to give us a lot of lessons in these fields and so much more. Bruce, welcome.
Thank you, Greg.
Hey, Bruce, I have to start out, in the Jewish community especially, we really see business people go the small business route, entrepreneurs, very, very small scale, the SME market, I should call it. You have worked not just in the corporate world, but in the Australian corporate world. My first question is, was that by design or did you just fall that way? How did it all happen?
I left university and probably in the third year of my course, I started applying for jobs through the careers opportunities that came up at the uni. I was doing interviews and I scored a job at a company called International Harvester.
Yes.
Doesn't exist anymore. And I thought, okay, I'll go there. It was a bit of fate, I suppose.
Okay.
And I didn't have any predisposition to going into a small business or a big business.
Right.
I wanted to try and build a career.
Okay.
And I was very interested in commerce, economics and marketing. And I wanted to try and explore those areas and see what it would take me. So.
And International Harvester, agriculture, yeah. I guess?
It actually was agriculture. It built tractors in Australia and everything from combine harvesters to seeders, which, a lot of Jewish boys really know a lot about that stuff. It also manufactured trucks, which was quite interesting. One of my first jobs, I was sent down to Geelong every day for 3 weeks to work in the plant, assembling and testing products before they were sent out to the field. Again, very good for a Jewish boy to learn about driving tractors, how to assemble a scarifier or a plough.
What is a scarifier?
A scarifier it's like a giant rake in some ways with these big tongs that rips through the field to tear it open. So, yeah, different type of experience, one might say.
And just getting into it though, obviously I assume at that role, you also had a lot of interaction with the non-Jewish community?
100%. I was a bit of a novelty, one might say.
And I'm just curious, how did you react to that? And also, how did other people react to you?
Look, 90% of the time it's fine. Yeah. People were generally interested or to know why don't I eat pork or why don't I eat these seafood things? Why aren't I coming to work on those days? And most people were genuinely interested. I did have one very bad incident of anti-Semitism, which occurred in a very senior meeting, or almost a board meeting, I was running a meeting which was called the Sell and Make meeting. It's pretty much what they call sales and ops meetings these days. Okay. And I was running that meeting, and the director of sales called me a bloody little Jew.
Interesting.
The meeting didn't go too well after that. It stopped. And I left the room, thought about it, came back in. He was forced to apologise.
Right.
But that completely discredited him for the rest of his career at the company. I stayed calm, but people knew that his behaviour was completely inappropriate. And it was a disturbing incident. I'd been to a non-Jewish school. I grew up in that. I had anti-Semitic incidences as a kid.
Sure.
And as much as it was kids on kids, I suppose, but I still remember many of them.
Right.
And it's something I just had learned to deal with, I suppose. Good or bad, that's just how it happened.
Right. But I think that there is one lesson in there, which is remaining calm.
Yeah.
And that can be extremely challenging at times, especially when people you feel like are attacking you personally.
Yeah, my belief was if I was going to get really upset with him, it was only going to spiral against me.
Right.
So the calmness was about drawing other people's attention to what had happened.
Right.
And them holding him accountable for his behaviour, which fortunately happened. Because even though I was running the meeting, I was the most junior person in the meeting. I had 3 other directors in there and the managing director, and they took control of that issue for me.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And while we're on the topic, you said you were junior at the time.
Yeah.
And we do have a lot of young people that watch. How does someone that is young still assert authority on one hand, but on the other hand, know that there are people above them as well?
Yeah, I haven't always done that well.
Okay.
Sometimes I get a little bit big for my boots, one might say. But
Right.
but I think it's having facts, data, and information.
Right.
Okay. So being able to present cases that are able to have credibility to others to understand, to be able to present a case that people can understand how you got to those conclusions, and then think, okay, that's a fair position. And also having the commitment, courage, and passion to follow it, because if you're not, it's never going to stick. So that commitment, courage, and passion is absolutely essential in helping put your case.
Right. And then adding a follow-up question to that, and I've spent some time listening to a lot of the stuff by Ray Dalio, where in most organizations, we truly don't know what is the correct decision. It's probabilistic thinking, if you will. How do you handle if people disagree with your decision, they want to go a different way, and especially, again, sticking with if you're the junior person where you're going to have to go that way, how do you get your mind around that fact?
Well, there's many times in my career where I haven't always agreed with something.
Sure.
Okay? And you have to make a decision, can you live with that or not live with it? Okay? Most of the time you need to go and talk about it, generally with your boss. Right. Okay? And help them reconcile that issue with you. What they should know is why you think. Right? Explain it. Get them to understand the position so they can at least respect the fact that you have a different opinion.
Right.
And if you can't live what you have to do, then you can't do your job properly. Okay? You can't head in a different direction to the company. Okay?
This is what I'm talking about.
This is when you have to make a decision whether you want to be in it or not be in it. Right. Okay? And I've never been to a point where an issue particularly drove me out. Right. Although I did work in a company where I found that my morals, my ethics didn't fit with it. Right. And I wanted to leave. And I left. And that's when I worked at Crown and the casino. Okay, I ran the casino and I ran marketing. It was a fascinating role. Right. I did that for 2 years. Although after 48 hours of joining it, I had decided this is not the industry for me. I rang my wife one night, probably about 2 o'clock in the morning, because that's ridiculous hours I used to work, and say, I think I've made a bad decision. And a year into the role, I told Lloyd Williams I wanted to leave. Right. And he offered me a lot of money to stay. I didn't accept it. Right. And he said, can you help me? Can you stay on? I stayed on another year, actually, while I sorted out structure, strategy for him, exited out of different parts of the business, and then left. Because it just didn't fit with me, and I had to make that decision. Right. It's interesting that you said within 2 days you felt that something was not quite right in your mind about it. Yeah. And I think that that's also maybe another topic, which is a hotbed topic, is when to give people the exit, if you will. I've heard so many people, most recently Jamie Dimon, say that he's never let anyone go, that he wishes he had not let them go earlier. Uh-huh. Any thoughts about that? Oh, people always considered that I moved pretty fast on fixing people problems in a business. Right. I'd always say you can't move fast enough. Right. Because if you've sincerely worked out that there is a people issue in the business, that issue is disrupting not just you, but it's tending to disrupt the people who work around that person. And it becomes an anchor on that team. Sure. And the sooner you can cut that anchor away, let them go and find a new career, build success for themselves somewhere else, the better for everybody.
And handling those, this is another hard question, which is having those tough conversations.
Yes.
They certainly are gut wrenching. I think that everybody who has any type of experience knows that. How do you handle that?
I'm a great believer in you have to grow as a person every day. And you grow not by living in your comfort zone, you grow by living in your discomfort zone.
Right.
And I remember the first time I had to manage a series of redundancies. Okay, and we actually had a training package on how to manage redundancies, and the program was: a person comes in, you tell them exactly what's happened, you don't get into a conversation with them, you give them the envelope, tell them to go away, and thank you.
Short and brief.
Very. And I thought, oh my gosh, okay. I went home that night, I felt really sick.
Yes.
I'd not done this before. But then I came in that day, I was focused, followed the instructions, and I did it. And I knew in many ways for some of these people I was talking to, and there was 4 people I had to do that day, that they would go on and build a better career, better opportunity for themselves. And
you genuinely believe that?
I believe that, and I genuinely believe that most of that happens most of the time, because people in the wrong jobs don't do nearly as well as people getting in the right job for themselves or in the right environment. And I did that, and I've done it again a couple of times. It's never pleasant. I'm not saying that you just give away the emotion, but your ability to handle it and the ability to do it not in a clear and pleasant manner gets better. And it's like anything. The more you practice outside your discomfort zone, the more you grow, the more capable you become.
Right. And I'm curious, has it ever happened the opposite way, where not only maybe have you been made redundant or let go, but more also strategically if the organization just disagrees with you?
Well, I engineered an exit by making my job redundant once.
Okay.
By splitting a job in 2. I said, look, my job's being split in 2. I think it should be split in 2. I'd like to take an exit plan on that.
Right.
And negotiated with the company an exit plan. They asked me not to tell anybody for 6 months, which I can tell you that's a very difficult thing to do, to work at 100% of the time, knowing that you're not going to be there in 6 months. And you almost feel like you're deceiving the people you're working with around you. And 4 weeks before I was to leave, I said to the company, it's time we make an announcement.
Right.
I couldn't handle it. I literally, it was just too emotional to keep going, and we made the announcement, and I was able to leave. And I was very happy with everything that we did together, and I was very proud on the day we walked out, and I know the board was very happy in terms of everything I'd done in that 6 months. Nobody would have known that I was leaving the company.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Now, Bruce, turning out to maybe a more pleasant topic. Before we started filming for real, and we may show clips of it, we were talking about the stages of companies' life cycle, from the beginning to the growth. I think that I have to do a diagram here. We'll hold it up here. But the various stages of life. The sweet spot you feel is over here, there. Can you just talk about this curve? Because I think it's absolutely fascinating.
It's not my curve. It was a curve drawn by a gentleman called Ishak Adizes, who's probably one of the most eccentric people I've ever met. But Ishak wrote a book about life cycles of companies and what happens in those life cycles, and how do you actually continually regenerate and rebuild your company and reset the foundations for what you need at the different stages of growth. So, startups filled with energy and new ideas,
right,
and they have to be able to commercialize those. Once they start to commercialize them, then they need to start to put in things like systems and processes so they can keep repeating what they're doing successfully and manage their customers. So if they don't do that, they'll die. Then as they move up that growth curve further, you need to adapt the skills and capabilities you have for a bigger business.
Okay.
And then again, new systems, new processes, new talents, new capabilities, and your growth starts to get more complex and more difficult because you've gone from what was probably the easy part. So how do you go there? Again, you need to reinvent your business to keep moving.
Right.
And his philosophy was, every year basically you need to sit down, you need to ask yourself a lot of questions about where you're at, what your challenges are, what are the gaps you've got in the business, how do you address these, set up a series of priorities and work through them to keep regenerating your business. Because if you don't, you start to peel off that growth curve and head towards death. And I worked with Ishak in a business that was an incredibly mature business, and we said, well, we want to reinvent ourselves, and we did through that process. And that process led to a business that was near death in his calculations when we did a diagnosis.
Sure.
And it worked out that we came back over a period of a few years to be the number one in market share, the number one in brand preference, the number one in the brand itself, and the highest return on capital employed. So that was a great result by reinventing yourself, by asking these questions.
And the reinvention, do you also feel that it has to also become different people in the organization?
Definitely sometimes. Yeah, definitely.
I suppose the best example of that is a company that we may or may not know of called Google, where the founders fired themselves and they brought in the CEO, Eric Schmidt.
Yep. And that's courage. And I think it's really important for people who have young startup businesses to think about what are the
Yes.
skills and capabilities I need to take my business to the next level.
Right. Now, Bruce, taking these skills that you have in the corporate world,
Yeah.
I guess fast forward a little bit to more recent times, the not-for-profit world.
Yes.
You are involved in a number of non-for-profits. Can you just discuss that a little bit, and then maybe we'll get into how you transfer those skill sets?
Yeah. So perhaps I should give a little bit of a foundation. My father drilled me with 3 values that were very important, okay? The first value is always do your best.
Right.
Okay. And he'd say, always be happy if you did best. I've tried to follow that on with my kids. And you always say, just do your best, even if you come last. Well, nobody wants your child to come last, but you just take what. But if they've done their best, if they've put their best effort in.
Sure.
The second one is what you put in, you get out. If you put trust into something, you'll get trust back. If you put effort into something, you've got more chance of success.
Right.
Okay. And he always said, you get out what you put in. So put in as much as you can.
Okay.
Okay. And the third thing he drilled into me was a very important concept that a community only survives by people putting into the community.
Yes.
Just like you guys have built Social Blueprint, okay? An unbelievable resource for people to access, an unbelievable resource for organisations to create linkage, okay? It's fantastic. And he said to me, a community cannot survive by just existing. It relies on people in the community making contributions to that community. So he gave me that those 3 personal values, and I call them personal values because I think personal values are very important versus corporate values. You need to work out what are your personal values in life.
Right.
Okay. And I've taken those and I've shared them with my family many times.
Right.
They made up the last chapter of a book I wrote called Passionate Leadership, and I think that helped me. So when I was about 7 years old.
So very little.
Okay. My mother was working at a place what was called Jewish Welfare, but an off branch called Francis Bachman Homes, which was residences for Jewish children who were either orphaned or needed fostering outside of their home. And I would go with her during school holidays to visit these places, and I couldn't comprehend why there were Jewish kids in this situation, and that had a massive impact. She also worked with Lady Nell, which was the dogs for blind people with vision impairment, and I remember going for drives with people who had their guide dog with them in the front of the car, and I was in the back of the car. So I saw my mother doing this. My father was very involved in Cranbourne Golf Club to the point he was president. My mother was president of the Associates. My father was very involved in Freemasonry, right? Very involved. He got to be Grand Deputy Poobah, but was chairperson of some of their key committees that were out benevolent committees helping people. And it set me a framework. And so why? That's why I think it's a fundamental responsibility we have to make the community survive.
I think there's also another message you're setting that is that parents out there, your kids watch you.
Yeah. Look, leadership and parents are leaders of their children. It's about sending messages. Okay, what you do, what you say, how you look, very important.
Right.
Okay, so you're perfectly correct. So probably I started getting involved in the community quite a while ago. I think probably some of the bigger roles I had, I sat on the Mount Scopus Council for a few years.
Right.
I got transferred to Singapore, and I sat on the Jewish Welfare Board there. I was responsible for Jewish education in Singapore.
Interesting.
Helped set up the plan that they now have a school. Then came back to Australia in 2008, and I got a call from a member of the Jewish Care Board saying, would I be interested in coming onto the Jewish Care Board? And I stepped up as a co-op member. I never became a full member. I went from being a co-op member to being president of Jewish Care.
Okay.
Like, everybody take a step forward. Well, I did, but nobody else did. I ended up with a job. And it was always an organisation I aspired to be part of, because it's such an important organisation. It's so critical in the fabric of our community.
Yes.
And what it does and the contributions it makes.
Yeah, I believe I don't know if it's accurate or not. It touches 30% of all Jewish people in the Melbourne community.
It gets around 5,000 intake calls a year. Okay, it's dealing with literally thousands of members of our community and working with many other groups in our community to provide support and structure.
Right.
And whether it's working in the disability area, care for our seniors, whether it's residential care or quality of life care, or whether it's work in terms of providing people who have got social issues, financial issues.
Right.
It's there providing structures around it. And it is a remarkable organisation that I was very proud of to lead for 3 years and sat on the board for 6. But I got transferred to Sydney, so I had to step off as president. I couldn't do it from Sydney because I got a job up in Sydney. So then I was able to appoint a fantastic president to take over from me, and was really proud about their achievements as they move forward.
And getting into the role itself there, what were some of, I assume that we tried to bring as corporate is structure and some type of business acumen to the organization.
Yeah.
Any type of interesting insights about that?
There's a couple. It's a really good question, actually. The first thing I learned is that the values of people who work in a not-for-profit like that are totally different to the values of people working in a corporate structure.
Can you tell me more about that?
They are really deeply aligned with the purpose of the organisation.
Okay.
And that purpose isn't about making profit.
Right. Personal profit, I mean.
Or profit for the organisation.
Okay.
It's really focused on the client needs, okay? Which, when you're in a corporation, ultimately, if you don't get a return on the bottom line, you ain't going to survive.
You'll get fired.
Okay? So you've got a different value set in terms of how people look at situations, how they judge issues. And that's very important. And it took me a while to understand that tension that happens between those areas. And then but what I found when I went there is that financially we were in a very dire situation. All right? Jewish Care had been using basically a lot of its bequest money to keep operational.
Right.
So we had to think about restructuring. So new CEO, new CFO, new structure. Where can we save money? All right. Nobody ever wants to save money in a community organisation, but we had to.
Right.
And how could we turn what were bequests that ran into the operational aspect of the organisation, so that we could put them in the bank for the future capital needs and build a capital capability, and yet make the organisation still meet its needs. You don't always do it perfectly.
Right.
Okay. And it's a very difficult organisation because it's dealing with such complex problems, whether it's an aging parent or a child with a disability or a person in financial distress or abuse. Very complex problems to be dealt with all the time. And getting everybody happy is not possible. And the Jewish community is always happy to express its dissatisfaction.
Would you say that, it's really interesting that maybe though, as a leader, 80% happy is actually somewhat successful?
Depends on what you're talking about there. I think if you're running a team and you want your team to be successful, you want them to get pretty close to 100%. Okay? You want them engaged. You want them passionate about what they're doing. You want them to be objective about what they're doing. You want them to be able to interact openly together. And I think it's pretty close. In running a community organisation, if you can get over the 80% mark, you're doing well. And it was very interesting because I would meet members of other ethnic communities as president, and they would admire Jewish Care. They would talk about what an unbelievable organisation it is, what it's done. Yet I sincerely don't believe that the community appreciates the contribution that organisation makes as much as what it should.
Yeah.
Okay.
I would agree. And it's also maybe sometimes where you have what I call the negative selection bias, which is that, as I said, 80% of the people are happy, but you hear about the other 2%, 20%.
Exactly. Squeaky wheels are very loud, aren't they?
Yes.
Yeah.
But the key message that I'm hearing from you is you cannot run a corporation the same as a non-for-profit.
You can't, but there are certain things you need to do. I'm a great believer in strong governance. Okay? I'm a great believer that having good governance over an organisation, whether it's a profit organisation or a not-for-profit organisation, is very important in helping that organisation achieve its goals. Okay? And that governance means having structure, having accountability,
right?
And being able to measure that and being accountable to the various stakeholders you have. Without that, you don't know if you're succeeding, and you can't be accountable to those stakeholders. And I think that's really critical in setting up a good governance structure, particularly in a not-for-profit. So it's common in both. It's a different methodology to some degree in terms of what you're looking at, but it is as critical, and I believe if not more critical, even in a not-for-profit sometimes.
So to have hard metrics, if you will.
Absolutely.
They may be different than how much money did you earn, obviously, but but have a metric.
Yeah, I mean, I'm very involved at Care these days.
That's what I was going to fast forward to.
Okay, and also chair Crohn's and Colitis Australia.
Yes. Which
it's got a big personal issue for me because I've had ulcerative colitis for over 40 years. And I didn't tell anybody about it for 39 years.
Okay.
But it's a widespread disease in community, and it's 4 times more likely for an Ashkenazi Jew to have this disease than other people. So it's got a lot of relevance on a personal basis, a community basis, but it's not just in the Jewish population. It's now everywhere, and we never used to see it in Asian communities. It's right through Asian communities now. It's growing rapidly. So passion there, but back to Care.
Right.
Wonderful organisation, really.
And Care, by the way, also serves a lot of non-Jewish people as well.
It serves a number of them. We're not exclusively Jewish.
Right.
We are primarily serving Jewish community, and doesn't matter. These non-Jewish people enjoy kosher food because it's beautifully prepared.
Right.
Okay, and they appreciate the Jewish community in a new and fresh manner as well.
Right. And can you just talk about Care? Certainly, what Shlomo has done is nothing short of remarkable.
Yeah.
But you've helped take it to another level. Just talk about Meek River since you've joined them.
I got a call from a gentleman called Daniel Gensel, who you've had on Social Blueprint.
Hi, Daniel.
And Daniel said, Bruce, would you mind having a chat to Shlomo Nathanson? You've met him at Men's Haven, and I think you need to help him form a board. We've had an advisory board, but you need to take governance to the next level. And all compliment to Daniel for thinking that organisation needs the next level of control and structure. So I was in Sydney hiding out from the big lockdown in Melbourne, and spoke to Shlomo, and I said, all right, I'll help you. But before I get involved, we're going to put in a whole series of systems and processes, because I'm not going to have a board set up and structured without having the right systems and processes. And they're things like putting in a right OH&S policy and program to protect everybody who's associated with it, to put in the right volunteering policy, to put in the right quality policies, right? We went through a whole series of things to make sure that our foundation for governance was strong before we appointed a board, which we did, and actually brought in external people to help us build some of those. They did on a pro bono basis. Unbelievable people.
Again, it goes back to passion, I suppose.
Yeah. I didn't want anybody who became a director. I didn't want Shlomo exposed to the issues, because I don't think people realise how much risk there is in running an organisation and the accountabilities you have. And in particular, as a director of an organisation, there are a lot of accountabilities.
Yes.
Whether they're financial, whether they're workplace related. You can go through a list of them if you go through the different regulations. You want to make sure you've got the right systems and processes in place. And I wanted to make sure we did that.
Right.
And then I wanted to make sure we had a board based upon skills.
Meaning, what skill do you bring to the table?
What skills do we need? We need a financial person.
Right.
We needed a community person. We needed a lawyer. Okay. We need a person who was strong in communications. Okay. Because part of the whole thing is you've got to
tell people.
We want somebody who understands social work and social issues.
Right.
So each time, when I was at Jewish Care, when I've been at Crohn's and Caltex Australia, when I came to CCARE, I build a skills matrix of what we need.
Yes.
And try and fill that skills matrix, because the board, you don't want everybody to have the same skills. You want them to have complementary skills that sit around it, and that's what.
And a shared goal, I suppose.
Exactly, but if you don't have the right skill mix, you can't address the issues in the right way, or find the resources to help you address the right issues in the right way.
And do you think also, again, coming back to this chart, Shlomo, to his credit, he was the founder, which also had the skills to say, I need some help.
He's a very humble person.
Right.
You've interviewed him and Rifki.
Yes.
Okay, it's like getting people who have done remarkable things, who are incredibly humble to talk about them openly is difficult. But to his compliment, Shlomo is a sponge.
Right.
He just wants to keep learning so he can help growing this organisation. So we have restructured that organisation twice since I've been with him, and we're about to restructure again. And we're restructuring because we're going through another growth phase. We've now been fortunate enough to get support from the federal government to continue our work, not just nourishing the tummies of people, but nourishing souls by further addressing isolation in the community. And our target is, we have about 50 people in our buddy program. We're extending that to 150 this year, 200 the next year, and making it more comprehensive. And that means we need to skill people up to new levels, find new volunteers,
right.
And again, be accountable. So you come back, we're taking money from the government. We need to be accountable,
right,
for that.
What are they getting for that dollar?
Right, and there are certain things we've agreed with them. We need to measure that, verify our performance against it. When we're not performing right, we need to fix it.
Right.
Okay, but if you don't measure these things, you can't be accountable.
Right.
And we need to be accountable to our donors. We need to be accountable to our volunteers, to our staff, to our clients, and the community in general on all that we do. And a not-for-profit work in the community, I believe that's a really critical aspect of its responsibility and accountability back into the community.
Yeah. Hey, Bruce, I'm jumping around a little bit here, but the question comes to me, criticism, as you mentioned earlier, we're in the Jewish community, especially where people are not shy.
No.
How do you handle criticism? Because surely you receive some of your journey.
I can remember going to the Classic Theatre sometimes on a Saturday night, and people coming up and addressing me with issues in Jewish care.
I'm not surprised.
Completely inappropriate. Or my wife being in the butcher in Glenfrey Road and somebody having a go at my wife. She has nothing to do with Jewish care. She just married me, right? Sometimes I think we eat our babies. It is a very difficult issue. Look, the only way to solve a criticism is ask people, let's sit down and talk about it.
Right.
Okay? There will be some people who cannot get over their criticism, right? They are fixated with it, okay? And I actually have a belief, particularly when you think about dealing with families who are putting an elder into care, it's a very difficult decision.
Yes.
Despite how good that care is going to, it will never be the same as the love they receive at home. They will never get the meals that are cooked at home.
Right.
Okay? They'll have a bell to ring, but it's not a hospital. Okay?
Right.
And the terrible thing about it is, as they're in that home and they are aged, they are going to continue to age. They're not going in there to get better. They're getting in there to be supported through the last years, and hopefully they're fulfilled their quality of care during that time. And what I've seen is it's a very distressing issue for families. And sometimes they have to express that distress, and it tends to come back to the provider. And I don't think anybody in the industry is doing nearly a good enough job in helping families cope with that change. Not necessarily the client themselves, okay?
Right.
Okay.
But
the family.
I understand. Yeah.
Okay, as an example and I think we can do a better job to ward off criticism by having them more involved in understanding what's happening, why and how. It won't eliminate it because sometimes the meal won't be what they like. Okay? These things happen.
Right.
Okay? And the only way to do it is to sit down and talk it through, and hopefully the other party can be rational. And you've just got to, Hashem gave us one mouth, 2 ears. Try and listen as much as you can. Okay?
And maybe adding to that even is to try to set expectations early.
That's the whole. I'm a great believer in if we could create induction programs, not for the client,
right,
but for the families.
Yes.
As an example in that one, I think that would help.
Yeah.
And then it's not just a one-shot thing; it's a continual engagement process that they need to be part of the entire process.
Yeah.
And probably 80 odd percent, 90% of people are really happy. It's the 10% they're not. And you don't like to know that 10% of people might not be happy. So what can you do to try and help them?
Right.
And then there are some times when maybe you're not the right provider for them.
Right.
Okay. And that you just need to address that. I can go back into my corporate days and say there were some customers I did not want to deal with. You probably had that experience yourself.
Absolutely.
Okay. So that customer's just not right for me. I think you should go somewhere else.
Right.
Yeah.
Where you'll be happier.
Yeah, exactly. And they will be happier probably. It's like we talked about before. Sometimes a monumental moment in a person's life when a job loss or job change happens can be something unbelievably good for them going forward. Okay?
Yeah, and if anyone really doesn't believe that and thinks it's hogwash, I highly encourage you to read Michael Bloomberg's book because he was fired at 39 years old. Yeah. But he's made $50 billion since then, so he's done okay. US dollars.
Not bad.
Hey, Bruce, we try to keep it somewhat short. Do you have any closing comments for people?
Look, I'd just go back to what I talked about before. I think community is unbelievably important. And I was fortunate. I had a father who drilled me with personal values.
Yes.
I think it's really important for people to find personal values and what they are and live those. And hopefully you can share them with your family, and that can help build strength in your family as well.
Right.
So thanks for the chance to meet you. And again, you guys do a great job, and it's a real privilege to be able to sit here and have a chat with you.
Thank you, Bruce.